Hey everyone, it's Simone. I'm here with Bella Crystal, and we are here for another soul conversation. Thank you so much for joining us in these soul conversations. Bella, what are you doing today?
I'm good and I'm happy we are speaking to the perceiver, which is gene key 18. And we were calling it the perceiver in the 64 doors. In human design, it's the gate of correction. In the gene keys, it has the frequency band from judgment to integrity to perfection. So what we're going to do today is to tune into the soul consciousness of this hexagram. So if you have the 18 in your chart, if you have the programming partner, maybe the 17, or if you have the other part of the channel, the 58, if there's anything that makes you feel like, oh, you have questions or you can really feel this gate, we would love you to interact with us, to ask questions, to just type under the video, and we'll get to your questions a little bit more towards the end of the video.
All right, everyone. So why don't we see what the 18 has to say today? The first images I see are arrows. So there are arrows moving upward, and they're very very sharp arrows, very precise in the energy. And then the being of the 18 kind of looks through. If the arrows were bars, it kind of looks through the bars of the arrows, if there were multiple arrows straight up and down. And then it walks through. Imagine if it were walking through a jungle, like just kind of walk through those arrows. It almost feels like in my body, when the 18 walked through, it felt like pointedness can sometimes be a prison. And the 18 walks through that. And then he's just taking me on a journey. He looked back at me and then he kind of glanced over his shoulder and he says, don't look back. Don't look back. Walk with me. And so he's almost inviting me up to walk side by side, because my point of view was from kind of behind him, if you will. So he's invited me to walk side by side with him. And he looks over at me as we're walking side by side. And he kind of picked up my hand, like, to walk hand in hand with him. And as he picked up my hand, it was like he was feeling into me. And it wasn't just for the connection, but it was like the truth of connection. And like he could feel me through our hand holding. And he put our hands over, he set them over his heart. And he's asking me, what do you want to do today? And I'm just saying to him, I would really love it if you would share the truth of you, the essence of you, in a way that would help people who are interested in this work and interested in learning more about the 18, about the truth of who you are. And he says, you want to know my soul? And I'm saying, yes, I do. I do want to know your soul. And he says, it's so vast. He says, are you sure you're ready for it? And I'm saying, yes, I feel like I am ready for it. And I feel like the world is ready for this information. And he says, well, come inside of me. And he takes me inside of his vessel. And he says, "What do you notice?" And the first thing I noticed was clarity and peacefulness. And then he takes me out and he says, "What do you receive from the clarity and peacefulness?" And I'm saying, "The vibration of clarity and peacefulness within me." And he says, "You had clarity and peacefulness within you." And I'm saying to him, "Well, yes, in general, I have clarity and peacefulness within me." And he says, "Then what do you want from me?" And I said, I'm just saying to him, a message for the world, for everyone who is involved in Gene Keys and human design, the I Ching, everyone who's interested in understanding the vibration of the 18 so that they can work with it themselves, including me. And he says, that's a different question. And I'm saying, oh, okay. And he says, he's showing me that how I ask the question is the difference between having the experience of like living in the 18 and viewing the 18, because then he opened up his heart and he's like showing me everything in the construct of him, in the geometry of him. And he says, "Do you want to live the experience or do you want to be told about the experience?" So he's making a real interesting distinction about what I'm asking for. And I am saying to him, "What is for the highest good of all who will hear this message?" And he says, "The highest good of all is to have the truest expression of the 18 that's possible in their vessels." And I'm saying, "Okay, then how do we accomplish that?" And he's inviting us all in. Uh, He says, "No, really, I'm inviting you all in." So on my screens, what I see is that he literally is opening the 18, his vessel for all of us to sit in the 18. So if you're listening to us and you're with us, imagine that the 18 has just invited you into the vessel of the 18. And he says that what each of us receives from the 18 is going to be distinct for us. So he says, if I describe my experience, that's probably going to be different from what other people experience. So he says, let's just do this part in silence. So it's a little bit different from what we've experienced with the um, keys, the gates, the archetypes, in the past. So let's all just sit in the vessel of the 18. And it's almost like in my screens, the way, and you may be experiencing it differently, it's almost like imagine that we went into a sweat lodge, big teepee, and it fits infinite. There are no space. Um, there's no there's not a limit on who can sit in the vessel of the 18. There's room for us all. And I see many, many beings sitting in the vessel of the 18. And he looks at me and he asks me, "What do you notice?" And I'm seeing that different people are having different experiences. Some are really peaceful and calm, they're sitting there. Other people are agitated and moving around. Um, some look like they can't get comfortable. Some stand up, some sit down, some lie down, some are sleeping. And he's just saying to me that perfection is different for each person and their design. And I'm just acknowledging that. And he says, as we sit, there is uh, an integration process. Like as we sit in the vibration of the 18, that process of integration is different from person to person. Each person is going to experience it differently. And he's saying like there's no right or wrong how you experience, and he's encouraging each of us not to, if you have the awareness of other people in the 18 with you, he's saying don't judge yourself by what other people are doing, because each person who sits in the 18 is having the experience that he or she needs to have, and that's not going to look like what your experience is. So he's showing that what some people have to release is different than what you or I have to release. And he also, it's like he's taking me inside the DNA of people, and it's almost like through this process we are, imagine, resetting your DNA to the purity of which you began with. And he's asking us to look inside of our hearts and see what we notice. And what I'm noticing in mine is it's almost like the slate's been wiped clean. Like instead of repeating patterns or having recurring thoughts, that there's not really anything there from the past, and that I have this motivation to be open to this desire, with to a curiosity, if you will. It reminds me of when we started, and he said, "Don't look back and come up and walk with me side by side." And so it's like this curiosity is opening me up to possibility. And then he shows me there's nothing to compare it to, right? And that reminds me of, without the comparison, there's no judgment, right? So, it's like when you have a new experience, you just go headlong in. You don't have anything to compare it to. So you can't say, you can't have a judgment about, oh, this is good or bad, right or wrong. It's just a new experience. It's the perfection of the experience. And um, that relates to an openness in my heart. He says, "You really want to talk to people." He goes, "You really want to understand how other people are having this experience, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. I'm totally interested in how people experience the 18, because I really do love hearing about people's experiences." And he says, "Some people really want to do that, and there are other people who that's not their perfection." And he says, "Let's just be in the now right now." And I'm saying, "Okay." And he says, how does that, when I say to you that, he says, how does that affect um, your physical vessel? And I said, it just releases everything. There's no pressure. Um, it feels like times where I've sat on a beach just um, looking out at the water and being in the peace of that moment. Again, he's asking, what do you want from this experience? And I'm just saying, um, the understanding of the purity of the 18 consciousness. And he's saying that the purity of the 18 consciousness is the purity of any person's consciousness. And he's asking me, he's like, what happens when every person is in the purity of their consciousness? And that's something really amazing to contemplate, right? What happened if we would all be in the purity of our consciousness? Would it mean that everything would be happy and joyful and there wouldn't be conflict or contrast? Or, and I don't think there would be. I think, I think that we would still be learning from each other, but um, somehow there would be a clarity to it that, and I just saw the word corruption fly out. So imagining interaction without corruption, a purity of consciousness. He says, that's it, imagine engagement without corruption. And what would that be like? And I'm saying, I don't know if, I could even imagine that every engagement without any corruption. Wow. So, it's, what would it be like for us all to be in our own integrity? And he says, that's it. That's what is the integrity of you? And he's saying, notice how the integrity of you individually is not the integrity of someone else. So there's no forcing your integrity on other people. There's this understanding that, we don't force an apple to be an orange. We want the orange in its integrity. We want the apple in its integrity. And he said, as humans, if you were each in your own integrity, and how would that, change the way you interact and relate to each other? He says, that's what I'm here to encourage, the truth of your integrity, and to allow that perfection, not only in yourself, but in other people. And he says, that's what I really hope that each of you who participated experienced today. The courage, the willingness, the motivation, the curiosity to discover your own integrity. He says that is the truth of, that's the truth. That's the perfection of life. Bella, do you have any questions? Anybody here with us have any questions? So where would we like to go?
There are some questions. I feel like integrity is one of those words that has been used almost like kind of too much, like being integrity. So my question is, because I feel like the shadow of the 18 can come in and tell us that we are in integrity, but actually we're just kind of about our own truth and our own judgment. So I'm wondering, yeah, what is the discernment? How does it feel in the body? How can we truly know that we are in integrity?
Because it's a great question. And he says that because corruption is so much a part of the earth's environment, it is hard to have examples, to bring forth examples of integrity. But he says that's why I use the fruits, because you can understand an orange and its integrity, or an apple and its integrity. And he's showing me, like, Joan of Arc was in her integrity. He says you do have examples of human beings who were uncompromising in the in their spirit. And when he said the word spirit, what he showed me was, like, imagine an atom bursting. And so that that blooming or bursting of energy is the purity of that blooming. And he says you do have people who, like Joan of Arc, for instance, who are unable to move from, the best way I can describe it is the dime. They can't come off their dime of what they know is the absolute truth, even if it costs them their lives, even if they have to stand up to insurmountable, forces. And he says it's rare in the earth plane for people to harness the passion of that explosion, if you will. And so we must be channeling a lot of energy because my internet must have just so he's talking about the purity of that explosion. And he says, I hesitate to even use the word passion, because the word passion is often corrupted. But when he says he's using it, imagine the energy release from the perfect springing forth. And he says that's rare, but it does happen, and you do see it in people. But then how do you discern when it's just somebody who is very, very focused on something, and someone who they can't live unless this thing happens? And he says that's the best litmus test that he can give us, because there are people who are truly committed to something, or they're like, a dog with a bone. They have this complete focus, but it's not coming from a purity of consciousness, from the truth of their selves. They wouldn't die for it. But then there are people like Joan of Arc who they can't even live if they aren't moving forth to that thing that's in their cellular DNA that tells them this is the truth. This is the truth. So he says, how do you discern for yourselves what you're being attached to, and what is essential for life, for you to exist, that you must keep doing it. You must drive forward. And he says that can help you get to integrity. He says that many people know what that is, but they don't have the courage or the integrity to stay focused on it. or they don't feel like they are capable of it. But he says then you see people like he flashed me, what's the girl's name? Greta.
Mm.
He says, but then you see children who can't do anything else. They have to speak that truth.
It's interesting because I was thinking of integrity as something subtle, and I hear that not that it always has to be subtle, but I feel like for me, it's more in the subtlety of it that I can wonder, okay, I always see this and then I see the layers and the consequences. And so it's like I'm kind of seeing that whole picture of, is this integrity? And it's like something subtle because I can say yes to something, or I can, I can, my garbage, I can decide to put it in different, like it's kind of in the subtleties that I was seeing it. But I hear that here we're bringing it back to kind of the essential, like what is like the big and courageous, and that is probably the first step to go. And then the subtleties are part of the picture. But today the 18 is speaking really about the bigger kind of courage to know that we're integrity, not just in the subtleties, but with our lives.
Indeed, he says.
And I do see a question for Randy. And I think, if I would answer these questions, I didn't hear the 18 say, don't look back. You can't look back. It's more like, if looking back keeps you stuck in the past, then there's no point of being stuck in the past. But really, that's what I heard. But do you want to answer? So the question is, how do you find what needs to be released if you can't look back? And the 18 is in the culture, the 17 in the SQ, the EQ is 46, and the 48 is the pearl. So here we have a lot of the keys from the Ring of Matter that has to do with the Venus sequence and our relationships and the integrity of our relationships.
The first thing the 18 did was he brought me back to that very first image where all these arrows that were really, really straight. So imagine, these really, really like almost like iron bars in a fence. And, he was saying that it's like we shoot off these arrows of truth that we create like a boundary with, that we can't ever move beyond them. And he was saying, don't get trapped by all these perceptions of truth that we've shot off at different times of our lives. It's like, come out of that. Come out of that. And then don't look back. And I think what he's saying is, don't look back. Don't judge yourself for them. If you're in the pursuit of truth, maybe this was the truth, he's saying. Maybe when you shot the arrow, it was the truth in the moment, but it's, maybe it's not because of corruption and because of point of view and perception and everything. He's like, come out of the structures and be in the truth of yourself. He takes me right into the cells. Go into the truth of yourself. And so this is what he's showing me. This is what the picture is. You have a question about something. Take that question and ask to have the experience or the answer in the truth of your DNA and see what springs forth. He says that contemplation is good, but when we get stuck in the perceptions of the past, of the truths of the past, that's when we get caught in like the swirling. And he's like, what is the truth of your DNA right now? You're constantly evolving and changing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Randy?
Yeah, and I wanted to thank Joanne as well, because she gave an example with her son who has 18.5 in his life's work. And when he was 9, he wanted to stop school. And that was his integrity. So they had to allow him to stop doing that. And then she's also speaking about, the corruption, and just kind of thanking you for your message. And then the last question now, it's about the fear gate. So we have the 18 in the splenic center, which is instinctive. And when we speak about the 18, we speak about the fear of authority. And I feel like that comes from kind of when you feel like there's corruption and that the authorities are out of integrity, then you fear them, because there is this like, yeah, you are supposed to follow them, but you can't follow them and be in integrity. But I guess that I can understand that the spleen gates, the fear gates, are the hardest. Is there anything that we can ask about the fear gates, about the splenic center, connected to the 18, that wants to be shared?
Well, first off, he says that's why he used the example of Joan of Arc. Because despite, she might have had fear, we don't know, but she was completely in integrity with her moving forward and her courageousness, and she didn't, kind of succumb to the fear. She went forward, and he's saying that each gate has its own challenges. And he says that fear in the splenic centers is the, kind of a chief challenge of the 18. But he says that all of them have their challenges, and that when you have this is what you came, part of what you came to work through is the shift from fear to fear. And he keeps showing me the word courage, so it's like developing courage. And now what he shows it to me is it was like a bunch of blankets on a bed, and it's like he's pulling the blankets off of the bed. It's like uncovering the fear. What is the he flashed me like the Princess and the Pea, with the pea under the mattress. So it's like, what is the true fear that's underneath all the blankets, and uncovering it? Because you might be afraid of pain, for instance, and when you take all the blankets off, it's a wrinkle in the sheet, and you just have to smooth it out. That when things are covered up, we're afraid because we don't know what's there. And when we uncover it all, we often discover that the thing we were afraid of isn't even what's underneath all the blankets. It isn't what's hidden. And he says it's the courage, the fearlessness to unpack, to reveal, to bring the truth to life. And he says that is, fear is one of the chief challenges of the splenic gates. But he goes, they all have their chief challenges. That's just the ones that you came designed to engage with. And he says, when you truly are, he brings me back to the cellular level and to Joan of Arc, when you truly aligned with your DNA and you just move forward with fearlessness. And he showed me a picture from my own life, and that's kind of the shamanic work that I do. So, and I see this, I always share them. So my son was in this car accident when he was 21, and he was in ICU, he was in coma for a long time. And I remember being in the ICU with him when he was in a coma, and we didn't know what was going to happen, if he was going to live or die. And one of my friends said to me, she said, I remember coming to the ICU and you met me at the door like you were taking me into your home. And you turned to your son, you turned to Tanner, and you said, "Doesn't he look great?" And I looked over at him, and she said, "His head was the size of a basketball." There were big gaping wounds. There was bandages everywhere. We couldn't see. There were slits. There were literally. She said he looked like Charlie Brown's. Charlie Brown. There weren't eyes. There weren't nose. There was no mouth. It was just kind of slits. And she goes, "You looked at him with so much pride, and you said, 'Look at how great he looks.'" And what I can tell you is that when I was in that ICU with my son, I knew that I was right where I needed to be. And I was the perfect mother for him in that moment. And I had fearlessness. Like, I knew in my cells that I was there to help him live if he chose that, no matter what anybody else thought. No matter if if the medical people on his team, no matter if they were like, not so sure if he's going to make it. No matter if my friends and family were sad or if they didn't know like what's going to happen to him, I knew in my cells that he chose to live and that I was there to help him do that. And it just drove every word out of my mouth. It drove all that I had. And so, that's what the 18 is, moving us to and getting us to connect, motivating us to connect with. What is the truth in ourselves that we know we're here? And I see Luis just joined us. Luis is one of our regulars and we love him. And, like when I see Luis's name pop up, I know part of the truth of his cells is to bring the magic of numerology and sacred geometry to life in the world. And he will post these grids, or he puts something about numbers in, that's an example of somebody like living their DNA in fearlessness. And that's what the 18 is catalyzing in us, this desire to connect with that in the cell. So that's I hope that helped.
Thank you, Simone. That was so powerful and so beautiful.
So do you have any other questions or?
No, I mean, I feel like this was a great way to end it. Like, I feel like I'm right there with you, many years ago, and just the power of that and the power of the perception that you had, the perception of perfection, even when things aren't perfect.
Right?
From a human perspective, yeah.
Yeah, people were looking at my life and they were like, "Holy moly, that's fun." Let's go to hell in a handbasket really quick. And there I was. Look at him. Look how great he looks. Because I knew in his consciousness he had chosen life, and I could do nothing other than choose life with him in every action, in every element of my being. I remember one night. This might help y'all. In ICU, they closed the ICU twice a day for 1 hour, and I was forced out into the hall. And there was this one day when the ICU reopened, but they wouldn't let us in. And I knew something is wrong. They've done something. He is having a really hard time. And I kept going up to the window and I was like, "Let me in, let me in. I can help you. I can help you. Let me in." And they wouldn't let me in. And he crashed while in that hour. And what had happened was there was a new nurse and she had put him on his side. And I knew when they put him on that side, he flipped out. There was something that was triggering him. So finally they got him stabilized and they let us back in, and I found out what happened. And it was a new nurse. And I was like, "Didn't you read the chart to see that he doesn't respond well on that side?" And she got really kind of angry at me and told me that if I didn't be quiet, they were going to ask me to leave the ICU. So I sat there in the chair and I started meditating and praying. And my sole focus was to send this woman, this nurse, as much love as she could receive. And my prayer was to her, I was talking to her consciousness, and I was saying, please allow her to be the best nurse she's ever been. And I was calling in all my guides, and I was praying for her soul. And hours, I'm sitting like this, and I'm just focused on sending this woman love, gratitude, and asking for as much help as I can to get her to be on her A game. And after about 2 hours, she asked me what I was doing. And I said, I'm praying for you. And she kind of looked at me, she'd been very nice to me. And she asked me, why are you doing that? And I said, my son is in your hands. And I need you to be the best nurse you've ever been in your whole life right now with me. And I will do anything to support you in that. Again, it's like, that was what was in my cells. I had to keep my son alive. So, that was, this is what the 18 says, I'm showing you purity of consciousness. I'm showing you integrity. That's why he's giving me these pictures of my own life to show you what that can look like in a person's life, so that you can tune into it, to your own cells, to yourself. So, 18 says he loves us, and he wants to be with us. And the moment when we allow the light from ourselves to spring forth in that passion and be, like the magic in our lives, the fearlessness in our lives, that feels so complete. So
Thank you, Simone. Thank
you're
you.
so welcome.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody who was here.
Yeah, thank y'all so much for joining us. We love you. Take care.